The morning air carried the comforting scent of freshly baked bread and rich, dark coffee as Ethan Parker stepped into Lawrence Bakery, his usual stop before heading to his downtown office. The small, upscale bakery was a haven for well-dressed professionals and retirees who enjoyed their pastries with the morning newspaper. It was a place of predictability, something Ethan valued deeply. At 52 years old, he had spent decades building his financial empire, trading spontaneity for control, relationships for success. The world of stocks, acquisitions, and market trends was one he understood completely. Human emotions, however, were far less predictable and far easier to ignore. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit, his polished leather shoes clicking softly against the Italian marble floor as he approached the counter. Before he could place his usual order, an almond croissant and a black coffee, something unexpected happened. The small silver bell above the bakery's entrance chimed, announcing a new arrival. A little girl, no older than 6, stepped inside, her presence an immediate contrast to the well-manicured environment. She wore a thin, oversized hoodie, once pink but now faded and speckled with dirt. Her blonde hair, tangled and unkempt, barely covered her small, round face. Her sneakers, mismatched and too big, slapped against the floor with each step. For a moment, silence filled the bakery. The regular patrons, most of them elderly, dressed in neatly pressed sweaters and comfortable slacks, exchanged uneasy glances. The bakery manager frowned and moved swiftly from behind the counter, clearly intending to usher the child out before she could disturb the carefully curated atmosphere. But before he could intervene, the little girl walked straight toward Ethan. She stopped just a few steps away, her large blue eyes steady but cautious. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a small but clear voice, tinged with an accent Ethan couldn't quite place. "Can I ask you a question?" Ethan hesitated. It wasn't often that someone addressed him directly outside of a business setting. The manager hovered nearby, waiting for his permission to intervene. Instead, Ethan nodded, intrigued. The girl reached into her tattered hoodie pocket and pulled out a tiny, worn-out mitten. She held it up with both hands, as though it were a priceless treasure. "Will you trade this for some bread?" she asked, her voice devoid of shame or hesitation. For a moment, Ethan thought he had misheard her. "My little brother is hungry," she explained. "He's 4. He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The elderly woman at the table near the window whispered something to her husband, shaking her head. Ethan's grip tightened around the leather wallet in his pocket. He was a man used to making split-second financial decisions, yet in that moment, standing before a child who was bartering with the last thing of value she owned, he found himself unable to respond. He looked down at the tiny mitten, frayed at the edges, its soft fabric worn thin from years of use. It was likely one of the last things she had from a home that no longer existed. Something inside him, something long buried, stirred. For the first time in years, Ethan Parker didn't know what to do. Ethan Parker was not a man easily shaken. In the world of high-stakes finance, he had faced economic downturns, billion-dollar mergers, and corporate betrayals without so much as a flinch. Yet, as he sat in the back of his chauffeured black Lincoln, the city skyline stretching endlessly outside the tinted windows, his mind was consumed by a 6-year-old girl holding out a tattered mitten in exchange for bread. He clenched his jaw, trying to focus on the numbers flashing across his phone screen, stock prices, investment reports, unread emails, but none of it held his attention. The image of the girl, her tangled blonde hair, her oversized hoodie swallowing her tiny frame, and her unwavering blue eyes haunted him. And then, there was her voice. Small, clear, yet carrying an unsettling weight. My little brother is hungry. He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. Ethan exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. He had done what any reasonable man would do. He had bought her a bag full of bread, pastries, and even a bottle of milk. He had handed it over, refused to take the mitten, and watched as she clutched the bag to her chest like a lifeline before disappearing out the door. That should have been the end of it. Yet, long after his morning meeting, the numbers and the financial reports blurred together. The conference call with Tokyo felt meaningless, and even the usual satisfaction of closing a multi-million-dollar deal failed to give him the rush it once had. By mid-afternoon, Ethan could no longer ignore the unease in his chest. He pressed the intercom button in his office. "Sue, clear my afternoon schedule." His assistant of 15 years, a sharp and efficient woman in her 60s, sounded puzzled. "Sir, you have back-to-back calls with London and Hong Kong." "Reschedule," Ethan said firmly, already shrugging on his coat. Something came up. Sue didn't argue, but as he exited his office, she watched him with an expression of mild shock. In 15 years, Ethan Parker had never canceled a meeting without a strategic reason. The crisp autumn air had turned colder by the time Ethan arrived at Lawrence Bakery again. The moment he stepped inside, the cashier recognized him immediately. "Mr. Parker," the young man greeted, adjusting his apron. "Back for another coffee?" Ethan ignored the pleasantries. "The little girl from this morning, Lily. Did she come back?" The cashier hesitated before shaking his head. "No, sir. The manager said she wasn't allowed to." Ethan felt an unexpected wave of irritation. Of course, she wasn't. Places like this weren't meant for kids like her. "Did you see which way she went?" "I think she turned right, toward the park." Ethan was already moving before the cashier finished his sentence. The streets beyond the bakery led to a small public park, where leaves in shades of amber and crimson littered the worn wooden benches. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes flicking over the elderly couples walking their dogs, the joggers making their rounds, the nannies pushing strollers. No sign of Lily. No sign of a 4-year-old little brother, hungry and waiting. A heaviness settled in his chest. He had no logical reason to be here, searching for 2 children he had met for only a few minutes. He had done his part, hadn't he? But something about that girl, her determination, her quiet dignity, the way she refused to beg yet still fought for her brother's survival, it unraveled something deep within him. Ethan Parker was not a man who dwelled on emotions. But for the first time in years, he found himself unable to walk away. And so, against all reason, he made a decision. He would find her. Ethan Parker had spent the last 20 years in pristine hotels, luxury penthouses, and first-class lounges, but nothing had prepared him for the sight before him now, a 6-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother, curled up together beneath a ragged blanket in an abandoned lot near the old train station. The air was cold, carrying the sharp bite of late autumn. Beneath the dim glow of a nearby street lamp, Lily lay protectively around Leo, her small arms wrapped tightly around his shivering frame. The thin fabric of her hoodie did little against the chill. Ethan hesitated. He had built an empire by making quick, decisive choices, yet now, standing before these 2 fragile figures, uncertainty gripped him. Still, he crouched down, speaking gently. "Lily?" At the sound of his voice, her blue eyes snapped open, filled with immediate suspicion. "You again," she said, her voice hoarse from the cold. Ethan nodded. "I've been looking for you." Lily's arms tightened around her brother. "Why?" He had no simple answer. Because he couldn't shake the image of her offering him a mitten in exchange for bread? Because, for the first time in years, he felt something other than the cold efficiency of business transactions. Instead, he simply said, "Because no child should have to sleep out here." Lily's gaze darted around the darkened streets, calculating her options. Ethan saw the flicker of fight-or-flight instinct, a child too young to be this cautious, yet already too wise to trust easily. "You don't have to come with me," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "But I have a warm house. A safe place for you and Leo to sleep tonight." She said nothing for a long moment, then looked down at her brother, whose small fingers clutched her hoodie in his sleep. She swallowed hard before whispering, "Just for one night?" Ethan nodded. "Just for one night." Ethan's black Lincoln pulled up to his house just before midnight. The home was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, overlooking a quiet lake. It was large, elegant, and meticulously kept, but to two children who had spent weeks surviving on the streets, it might as well have been a castle. Leo stirred awake as Ethan carried him inside. His small fingers gripped Ethan's coat as he mumbled sleepily, "Is this heaven?" Lily stood in the foyer, her posture rigid as she took in the high ceilings, polished hardwood floors, and grand staircase. The house smelled of wood polish and faint traces of cinnamon. Margaret, Ethan's housekeeper, had likely prepared tea, as she always did late at night. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her gray hair neatly pinned back, her warm yet discerning eyes taking in the situation without a word. "Margaret," Ethan said, adjusting the sleeping boy in his arms. "We have guests." Her expression softened. "I'll prepare the guest rooms." "No," Lily interrupted quickly. "We stay together." Ethan met her eyes, then nodded. "One room. For now." Margaret led them down the hall to a cozy guest bedroom, far less grand than the rest of the house but still more than Lily had dared hope for. A queen-sized bed, clean white sheets, and soft blankets, luxuries she had long forgotten. Ethan placed Leo down carefully, pulling the blanket over his small frame. Lily hesitated before crawling in beside him, her small body tense beneath the warmth. Ethan reached for the light switch, but Lily's voice stopped him. "Can you leave it on?" she whispered. He turned back, studying the way she clung to her brother even in sleep. He nodded. "Of course." As he left the room, Margaret was waiting in the hallway. She folded her arms, her voice gentle yet firm. "What are you planning to do, Ethan?" He glanced back toward the slightly open door, where two small figures lay curled together in the first safe bed they'd had in who knows how long. "I don't know," he admitted. But for the first time in years, he knew he couldn't just walk away. For the first time in decades, Ethan Parker's life was no longer predictable. His world had been a carefully structured routine: wake up at 5:30 a.m., exercise for precisely 45 minutes, enjoy a quiet coffee while scanning financial reports, then leave for his office before the city truly woke up. Every detail of his day was planned for maximum efficiency. But that was before Lily and Leo entered his life. Now, mornings were anything but quiet. Instead of reviewing the stock market, Ethan found himself refereeing debates over which cereal was better, Frosted Flakes or chocolate puffs. Leo, barely able to reach the kitchen counter, would insist on pouring his own milk, always spilling at least a few drops. Lily, ever watchful, ate with precise, measured bites, as if still worried the food might disappear at any moment. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed how Leo's small hands would grip his fork too tightly, as if afraid someone might take it from him. He noticed how Lily, despite her tough exterior, would carefully save part of her meal, tucking it away as though preparing for a future where food might not come so easily. One morning, as they sat at the kitchen table, Ethan made an offhand remark. "You don't have to do that, Lily." There's always more food." She froze mid-motion, her fingers still curled around a piece of toast. Then, slowly, she looked up at him, suspicion in her blue eyes. "You say that now," she muttered, "but things change." Ethan's chest tightened. What kind of life had she led to make a 6-year-old think like that? Instead of pressing, he made a silent promise. He would prove to her, day by day, that some things don't change. The mansion, once a symbol of his success but void of warmth, had transformed. Books appeared on coffee tables, brightly colored crayon drawings found their way onto the refrigerator, and laughter, something Ethan had nearly forgotten, echoed through the halls. One evening, Ethan returned home earlier than usual to find Leo sitting in his office chair, spinning in circles, giggling uncontrollably. Lily stood by the bookshelf, arms crossed. "You shouldn't be in here, Leo." Ethan paused at the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Leo grinned. "But it's fun. Ethan's chair is like a spaceship." Ethan finally spoke, his voice amused. "Well, Captain Leo, do I need to install seatbelts for you?" Leo gasped in delight. Can we really?" Lily rolled her eyes, but even she couldn't fully suppress a smile. Not everything was easy. One night, Ethan woke to the sound of muffled cries. Following the noise, he found Lily sitting up in bed, her small body trembling, her breath shallow. "Bad dream?" he asked softly. She nodded but said nothing. Without asking, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to tell me what it was about. But I'm here." Lily looked at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "My dad came back, but only for Leo. He left me behind." Ethan felt a deep ache in his chest. He didn't say empty words like "that would never happen." Instead, he reached for a small flashlight from his pocket, the kind he had once used as a child to ward off nightmares. "Here," he said. "Whenever you feel scared, turn this on. The dark never wins when you have a light." Lily took it carefully, as if it were something sacred. For the first time since arriving, she let herself lean against him, just for a moment. Ethan didn't move, afraid that even the slightest shift would break whatever fragile trust she was beginning to place in him. And in that moment, he realized this was the most important deal of his life. It had been a little over 2 weeks since Ethan Parker brought Lily and Leo into his home. The days had settled into a routine, morning breakfasts filled with messy cereal spills, quiet evenings spent reading by the fireplace, and hesitant smiles that grew more frequent each day. For the first time in years, his once silent mansion felt like a home. But peace is often fragile. Ethan was at his office when the call came. "Mr. Parker, this is Helen Matthews from Child Protective Services. We need to talk." A cold feeling spread through Ethan's chest. He had been expecting this call eventually, but now that it had come, he felt an unexpected sense of panic. Helen's voice was professional but firm. There was a report about 2 missing children matching Lily and Leo's description. "Someone recognized them when you were at the bakery." Ethan gripped the phone tighter. "They weren't missing. They were abandoned." "I understand, Mr. Parker," Helen replied. "But legally, they should have been placed in the system while we searched for a suitable home." She paused briefly. "We have identified a potential adoptive family, the Fosters. They have experience fostering and adopting children in need." Ethan's pulse quickened. "They already have a family?" "Yes. A stable home, 2 adopted children, and a large house in the suburbs." His jaw clenched. Of course, they sounded perfect. Helen continued, "I'd like to meet with you in person." Tomorrow morning. We need to assess what's best for Lily and Leo. Ethan forced his voice to remain calm. Fine. I'll be there. But when he hung up, he knew he was running out of time. That night, over dinner, Ethan barely touched his food. Leo was happily talking about dinosaurs, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. But Lily always noticed. She set down her fork, her sharp blue eyes locked onto Ethan. What's wrong? Ethan debated lying, but one thing he had learned about Lily, she could smell dishonesty a mile away. He sighed. A social worker is coming tomorrow. They found a family that might want to adopt you and Leo. Leo, too young to fully understand, kept eating. But Lily, her whole body tensed. What if we don't want to go? She asked. Ethan met her gaze. Then we fight. Lily's small hands clenched into fists, her voice shaking with anger. They always say it's our choice. But it never is. People make decisions for us, and we just have to go along with it. Her words hit him like a blow. How many times had she and Leo been shuffled around, left to fend for themselves, promised security only to be let down? Ethan reached across the table, his voice steady. I don't want you to go. But I need you to trust me. Lily's lip quivered, but she quickly bit it, willing herself not to show emotion. Finally, she whispered, I don't want to lose another home. Ethan swallowed hard. Neither did he. Ethan Parker had built his entire life on making the right choices, investments, acquisitions, negotiations. Every decision had been calculated, weighed, and executed with precision. But now, he faced a choice unlike any before. And this time, spreadsheets and financial forecasts wouldn't help him. The next morning, Ethan sat in his study, his hands clasped tightly together as Helen Matthews from Child Protective Services reviewed her notes. Across from them, Thomas Garrett, Ethan's attorney and longtime friend, watched the conversation unfold with careful neutrality. Helen cleared her throat. Mr. Parker, we appreciate the care you've given Lily and Leo. But we must consider what is best for them long term. Ethan resisted the urge to scoff. And you think that's with a family they've never met? The Fosters have experience with adoption, Helen explained. They live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, have a strong support system, and they don't know them, Ethan cut in. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. They don't know that Leo refuses to sleep unless the hallway light is on. That Lily won't eat unless she knows she can save some for later. That they still flinch when someone raises their voice. Helen hesitated. I understand, but they would adjust. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Or they'd lose another home. Another promise broken. Helen sighed. There is an alternative. Silence filled the room. Ethan already knew what she was about to say. You could file for permanent guardianship, she continued, or even adoption. The words hung between them like a challenge. You should know, Helen added, that this won't be easy. The court will scrutinize everything, your work schedule, your ability to provide emotional support, your lack of prior parenting experience. You'd need to commit fully. Ethan exhaled slowly. Commit fully. Those words terrified him more than any high-stakes business deal ever had. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, the glow of the fireplace casting long shadows against the walls. On his desk lay the legal documents Thomas had brought over, the first step toward adopting Lily and Leo. He stared at them for a long time, his chest tight with doubt. Could he really do this? He had never planned for a family. Never imagined himself as a father. His life had been structured, predictable until now. He thought about Lily, how she had started trusting him, piece by piece. How Leo had fallen asleep in his arms just the night before, safe for perhaps the first time in years. And then, the memory that haunted him most, Lily's quiet confession at dinner. "I don't want to lose another home." Ethan closed his eyes, then picked up a pen. And with a deep breath, he signed the papers. The family court courtroom was smaller than Ethan Parker had expected, yet it felt immense. The walls, lined with dull wood paneling, seemed to close in around him. The air was heavy, not with the scent of polished furniture or legal books, but with uncertainty. Lily and Leo sat beside him, dressed in the new clothes Margaret had helped them pick out. Lily's blue dress matched her sharp, observant eyes, while Leo's small hands clutched the stuffed dinosaur he never went anywhere without. Across the room sat Mark and Diane Foster, the couple who wanted to adopt them. They were polished, professional, and prepared, a university professor and a pediatrician, the textbook definition of an ideal family. Ethan, on the other hand, was a billionaire businessman. A man with no prior experience as a parent. A man who had once believed love was just another transaction. And today, the judge would decide whether he deserved to be a father. Judge Robert Harmon, an older man with a firm but fair reputation, adjusted his glasses and glanced at the papers before him. His deep voice filled the room. "Mr. Parker, while you have provided a stable environment for these children, there are concerns." Ethan sat still, his hands clasped together. "You have no history of fostering or adoption. You've spent your career focused on business, working extensive hours. Can you honestly say you have the time and emotional capacity to raise 2 children?" Ethan's chest tightened. It was a fair question, one he himself had struggled with. Thomas, his attorney, leaned forward. "Your Honor, what makes a good parent isn't just experience, it's commitment. Mr. Parker has already adjusted his entire life for these children." The judge nodded but remained unreadable. He turned to the Fosters. "And you? Why do you believe Lily and Leo would be better placed in your care?" Diane Foster spoke first. Her voice was warm, rehearsed, and confident. "We have a strong, supportive home with 2 other adopted children. We've been through this process before. We understand the challenges of children who have experienced trauma." Ethan stiffened. They were everything the court would want: structured, stable, experienced. And then, the judge turned to Lily. "Lily, would you like to say something?" The room went silent. Lily sat up straight, her small hands gripping the edge of her dress. "Yes, sir." Her voice was clear, but there was a nervous tremor beneath it. "The Fosters seem nice," she began. "But, they don't know us." She turned to glance at Ethan, then back to the judge. "They don't know that Leo only sleeps if the hallway light is on. Or that I have nightmares about my dad leaving us." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "They don't know that Ethan makes us pancakes on Sundays. Or that he reads us books every night. Or that he never, ever yells, even when Leo makes a mess." The courtroom was completely silent. Lily's hands balled into fists on her lap. "People always say they want to help us. But they give up when it gets hard. Ethan never gave up. Not when we ran away. Not when I got scared. Not when I said I hated him." Her blue eyes met the judge's. "Please don't take us away from him." Judge Harmon removed his glasses and sighed, rubbing his forehead. Finally, he spoke. "In all my years on this bench, I've learned that family isn't just about structure, it's about connection." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Parker, you are not the conventional choice for parenthood. but it is clear these children are already home. A pause. I am granting the adoption. Ethan barely heard the rest. Leo cheered, his small hands clapping together. Lily exhaled sharply, her lips trembling as she turned to Ethan. And then, for the first time, she threw her arms around him. Ethan Parker, a man who had once believed money was the only security, realized he had just won the most important battle of his life. For most of his life, Ethan Parker measured success in numbers, profits, acquisitions, and net worth. But as he sat at the dining table, watching Lily and Leo giggle over their pancakes, he realized something profound. Success wasn't about numbers. It was about moments like this. The day after the adoption was finalized, the house felt different, not because the walls had changed, but because something unseen had shifted. There was laughter in the air, the scent of maple syrup and fresh coffee filling the kitchen. Lily sat across from Ethan, flipping through a book on animals, her eyes bright as she underlined facts she wanted to remember. Leo, meanwhile, was more focused on his pancakes than on breakfast etiquette. He had syrup smeared across his cheek, his small hands gripping his fork like it was a treasure. Margaret, standing at the stove, watched the scene unfold with a knowing smile. After 20 years of running Ethan's household, she had seen the mansion transform from a cold, lonely place to a home filled with love and chaos. Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee, then glanced at the two children sitting across from him. "How about we do something special today?" he asked. Leo's eyes lit up. "Like what?" Ethan shrugged. "You tell me." Lily hesitated, glancing at her brother. "Can we just stay home?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Home?" She nodded. "We've never really had one before." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He put down his coffee. "Then home it is." Over the next few weeks, their new life took shape. Ethan, once consumed by business meetings and market trends, found himself rearranging his priorities. He took mornings off to drive Lily and Leo to school, waiting patiently as Leo struggled to tie his shoelaces. He learned that bedtime stories weren't just for kids, sometimes they were for grown-ups who needed them just as much. And on Sundays, pancakes became a ritual, because some traditions, no matter how simple, meant everything. One evening, as Ethan worked in his home office, a small knock interrupted him. Lily stood in the doorway, holding her walkie-talkie, the one he had given her months ago. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. She shifted on her feet, then nodded. "I just wanted to make sure it still works." Ethan smiled, picking up his own walkie-talkie. Loud and clear. She hesitated, then, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "Good night, Dad." Ethan froze. It wasn't just the word, it was the trust behind it. A warmth spread through his chest as he pressed the button on his walkie-talkie. "Good night, Lily." Months ago, Ethan Parker had lived in a house too big for one person. Now, he had a home filled with messy mornings, bedtime stories, and whispered goodnights. For the first time in his life, he understood what it truly meant to be rich. Life has a way of reminding us what truly matters, often in the most unexpected ways. Ethan Parker spent years believing that success was measured in wealth, power, and control, until two children taught him otherwise. His journey with Lily and Leo reveals a truth we often forget: family isn't just about blood, it's about love, commitment, and showing up when it matters most. No amount of financial security can replace the warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of knowing someone will be there when you're afraid, or the simple joy of hearing a child call you dad. For many, especially those in their later years, it's easy to look back and wonder, Did I spend enough time with the people who mattered? Did I build something real beyond my career? Ethan's story teaches us that it's never too late to open our hearts, to redefine what family means, and to find joy in the small, everyday moments. In the end, the legacy we leave behind isn't in bank accounts or business deals, it's in the lives we've touched and the love we've shared.